Chosen one, the person you least suspect has been hiding this. God revealed it. There are moments when you look back at a situation and realize that something never quite made sense, not because you had proof, not because someone openly told you that something was wrong, but because there were small moments you could not explain. So now return to the title. The person you least suspect has been hiding this. What is this? Perhaps the most important answer is not one secret sentence or one shocking confession. It is the truth you needed in order to see the situation differently. Maybe you needed to understand someone's intentions. Maybe you needed to recognize a pattern. Maybe you needed to understand your own emotional attachment. Maybe you needed to realize that a relationship had changed. Maybe you needed to see that you were stronger than the version of yourself who once accepted confusion as normal. And perhaps this is what spiritual revelation often looks like, not necessarily a dramatic moment where every mystery disappears. Sometimes it is simply the moment when you finally see what has been in front of you. You realize, I was waiting for them to give me permission to move forward. But you do not need that permission. You realize, I was waiting for them to explain why they changed. But their behavior has already told you enough. You realize, I thought losing this person would destroy my peace. But your peace is returning. You realize, I thought I needed every answer. But now you understand the one answer that matters. What should I do with what I know? That is the real question. And perhaps your answer is not confrontation. Perhaps it is conversation. Perhaps it is forgiveness. Perhaps it is distance. Perhaps it is a boundary. Perhaps it is simply releasing the need to know more. You have to let wisdom decide. But do not miss the most beautiful part. Whatever becomes clear, you do not have to face it alone. If faith is part of your life, you can bring the confusion to God. You can say, God, help me see people honestly without becoming cynical. Help me recognize truth without becoming suspicious. Help me forgive without ignoring wisdom. Help me walk away when I need to walk away, and help me stay when staying is right. Above all, give me peace with what I cannot control. That is a powerful prayer because it does not demand a particular outcome. It asks for wisdom, and wisdom can protect you from two opposite mistakes: trusting everybody blindly, or trusting nobody at all. You do not need either extreme. You need discernment, you need boundaries, you need patience, and you need the courage to accept reality, even when reality is different from what you hoped. Maybe someone you trusted really did hide something. If so, that does not mean you were foolish for trusting. It means you were human. What matters now is what you learn. Maybe someone you suspected turns out to have had completely innocent reasons. If so, that does not mean your feelings were meaningless. It means you had an opportunity to learn the difference between intuition and assumption. Either way, you can grow. That is why this message should not leave you afraid. It should leave you awake. Awake enough to notice. Wise enough to wait. Strong enough to accept. Humble enough to question your assumptions, and peaceful enough to let truth speak for itself. There may be a person in your life who comes to mind right now. Do not rush. Do not send an angry message because of this video. Do not accuse them. Instead, ask yourself 3 questions. What do I actually know? What am I only assuming? What would wisdom ask me to do next? Those 3 questions can save you from unnecessary pain. And if you realize there is something you genuinely need to discuss with someone, approach the conversation with calmness. You do not have to begin with accusation. You can begin with, I noticed something, and I want to understand it. That creates space for truth. Sometimes people reveal what they were carrying. Sometimes you discover that your interpretation was incomplete. Sometimes you receive an explanation, and sometimes you discover that the relationship cannot continue in the same way. Whatever happens, clarity gives you something confusion never could: a direction. And perhaps that is the revelation you were waiting for. Not necessarily a secret about another person, but a clearer understanding of your own path. You have spent enough time wondering whether you were imagining everything. You have spent enough time replaying conversations. You have spent enough time asking whether you should have noticed something earlier. Release that burden. You are allowed to learn things when you are ready to learn them. You are allowed to recognize something today that you could not recognize yesterday. Growth changes what you are capable of seeing, and perhaps the reason the answer feels different now is because you are different now. The person who needed constant reassurance may be becoming someone who trusts their values. The person who feared being alone may be becoming someone who understands that peace is more important than forced connection. The person who accepted confusion may be becoming someone who asks for clarity. The person who kept giving endless chances may finally understand that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. That is a powerful transformation. And if this message has made you reflect on someone or something in your life, do not focus only on what they may have hidden. Ask what the experience has revealed about you. A conversation that felt different, a sudden change in someone's behavior, something they said that stayed in your mind longer than it should have, a question you asked that never received a straight answer, and perhaps you tried to ignore it. You told yourself you were overthinking. You told yourself that maybe you had misunderstood. You gave people the benefit of the doubt because that is what you wanted to do. But then something changed, and suddenly, the person you least suspected became connected to a question you had been carrying quietly. That is where this message begins, because the most surprising truths are not always hidden by the person you already distrust. Sometimes the person you never imagined questioning is the person whose actions you eventually need to understand. And before you become suspicious of everyone around you, hear this carefully. This message is not asking you to accuse somebody. It is not telling you that a specific person has secretly betrayed you. You do not need to turn every strange moment into evidence. Instead, this is about something deeper. It is about discernment. It is about learning to recognize when something in your life deserves a closer look. And perhaps, from a faith perspective, it is about allowing God to bring clarity without forcing an answer before you are ready to receive it. Because sometimes we desperately want to know the truth, but we are not yet ready for what the truth will require us to do. Maybe that is why the answer did not come immediately. Maybe the waiting was not meaningless. Maybe the silence was giving you time to become stronger, calmer, and wiser. Think about the person who comes to your mind when you hear this title. Do not rush to label them. Just notice who appeared in your thoughts. Why that person? Why them and not someone else? What memory came back? What unanswered moment suddenly feels important? You might discover that your mind is not actually pointing you toward betrayal. It might be pointing you toward understanding. And there is a major difference. Sometimes we think the hidden thing is a terrible secret, but the hidden thing may simply be a motivation, a feeling, a decision, a fear, a misunderstanding, a truth someone was not ready to communicate, or something about yourself that you were never able to see clearly because you were too close to the situation. That last possibility matters more than you may realize, because what if the greatest revelation is not simply what someone else was hiding? What if it is understanding why their behavior affected you so deeply? What if you are being invited to see the situation from a completely different perspective? There may have been a season when you wanted answers immediately. You wanted somebody to explain themselves. You wanted the missing pieces. You wanted to know whether your feelings were right. But perhaps your next chapter does not require you to chase every answer. Perhaps it requires you to become so grounded in truth that confusion no longer controls you. That is where faith becomes important. Faith does not mean pretending everything is fine. Faith does not mean ignoring red flags. And faith does not mean accusing someone without evidence. Faith can mean saying, God, if there is something I need to understand, help me see it clearly. And if there is something I do not need to know, give me the wisdom to leave it alone. That is a powerful prayer, because sometimes clarity is not receiving every detail. Sometimes clarity is knowing what deserves your attention and what does not. And maybe that is why you are hearing this message now. Not because you should become suspicious, but because you may be entering a season where you need stronger discernment than before. You have already learned what it feels like to trust blindly. You have already learned what happens when you ignore your own boundaries just to keep peace. And perhaps you have also learned that not everyone who smiles at you understands your journey. That does not make them your enemy. It simply means you must stop expecting everyone to carry the same intentions you carry. There is another layer to this. Sometimes people hide things because they are afraid, sometimes because they are ashamed, Sometimes because they do not know how to communicate, sometimes because they want control, and sometimes because they genuinely believe they are protecting you. That is why you cannot build your entire conclusion on suspicion. You need wisdom, you need patience, you need observable truth, and you need the courage to accept what becomes clear. If there has been a person or situation in your life that has felt strangely difficult to understand, you can share in the comments, not the person's name, but simply what the experience taught you about trust. Because someone else reading your words may realize they are not the only person who has struggled with this. And stay with this message, because there is something even more important coming. The question is not only who has been hiding something. The deeper question is, why were you allowed to remain unaware for so long? That is where the story begins to change. Part 2. Why the truth took so long. There is a reason certain answers arrive later than we want them to. Sometimes we think the delay means nothing is happening, but life does not always work that way. A seed can be growing beneath the ground while everything above it looks completely still. In the same way, understanding can develop inside you long before you can put it into words. Think about who you were a year ago. Think about what you tolerated. Think about what you believed about certain people. Think about what you thought you needed. Then compare that person with who you are becoming now. You may realize that if the truth had appeared earlier, you might have reacted differently. You might have confronted someone before you understood the full situation. You might have walked away from something that needed one final lesson. You might have stayed somewhere you should have left. You might have blamed yourself, or you might have blamed someone else. Timing matters. And this is one of the hardest things about spiritual growth. We often ask God for information when what we actually need is wisdom. Information tells you what happened. Wisdom helps you understand what to do with what happened. Those are not the same thing. Imagine discovering that someone you trusted kept something from you. Your first reaction might be anger, then confusion, then disappointment. You might start replaying every conversation. You might ask yourself, how did I not notice? Was I foolish? Oh, were all those moments fake? Did I trust the wrong person? But be careful. A hidden truth does not automatically make your entire history with someone a lie. People can genuinely care about you and still make poor decisions. People can love you and still fail to communicate. People can have good intentions and still hurt you. And people can also manipulate or deceive. That is why discernment cannot be replaced by emotion. You have to allow the truth to become clear enough that you can respond wisely. This is perhaps one of the biggest lessons hidden inside the title. The person you least suspect may not be the villain you imagined. They may simply be the unexpected connection through which you finally learn something important. Maybe they reveal what you have been avoiding. Maybe their behavior exposes a boundary you needed to establish. Maybe their silence teaches you not to depend on other people's approval. Maybe something they hid forces you to stop ignoring what you already knew about yourself. And maybe, in another situation, you discover that your original suspicion was wrong. That possibility matters too, because if you enter every situation expecting betrayal, fear can start creating evidence where there is none. You can begin interpreting every silence as rejection, every delayed message as disrespect, every change in someone's mood as proof of something hidden. That is not discernment. That is anxiety pretending to be intuition. Real discernment is calmer. It does not need to scream. It observes. It waits. It compares words with actions. It recognizes patterns. And when enough truth appears, it makes a decision. That is the kind of clarity worth praying for. Perhaps this is why your past has included moments where you felt confused. Maybe you were learning to stop demanding certainty from people who could not give it. Maybe you were learning that your peace cannot depend entirely on somebody else's explanation. Maybe you were learning to ask better questions, not, why did they do this to me? But, what is this situation teaching me? Not, how can I make them tell me everything? But, what do I already know from their actions? Not, how do I make this relationship stay exactly as it was? But, is this relationship healthy for the person I am becoming? Those are different questions, and different questions produce different lives. There may also be something you need to hear if you have been feeling disappointed lately. Do not assume that because something was hidden, your future has been ruined. A delayed truth can sometimes protect you from making a permanent decision based on incomplete information. Maybe the reason the answer came slowly was because you were becoming capable of handling it. The old version of you might have reacted emotionally. The new version of you can pause. The old version might have begged for explanations. The new version can observe. The old version might have stayed just to prove loyalty. The new version can recognize that boundaries are not betrayal, that is growth. And sometimes growth is the revelation. If this describes a change you have noticed in yourself, you can write one simple sentence in the comments. I see things differently now. Not because you have all the answers, but because you recognize that you are no longer the same person who entered that situation. And now we reach another important point. You may have been asking, if something really was hidden, why didn't I see the signs? Perhaps you did. Maybe you simply did not understand what they meant. A small change in behavior, a repeated contradiction, a feeling of distance, a conversation that never quite reached the truth. You noticed, but you interpreted those things through the version of the relationship you wanted to believe in. That is human. We all do it. We see what we hope is true. But maturity teaches us to look again, not with bitterness, with honesty. Because the truth does not need your hatred to become true. It only needs you to be willing to see it. And there is a final reason this matters. The truth is not being revealed so that you can spend the rest of your life staring backward. It is being understood so that you can finally move forward. That is the shift we need to talk about next. Because once you stop asking, why did they hide this? Another question begins to emerge. What am I supposed to do now that I can see more clearly? There comes a moment when scattered pieces begin connecting, not dramatically, not always with some huge announcement. Sometimes it happens quietly. You hear something, you notice a pattern, you remember an old conversation, you recognize that a behavior you once excused has happened repeatedly, and suddenly you understand why something never felt completely right. This is where you need to be careful. Clarity should make you calmer, not more reckless. If your conclusion makes you desperate to confront everyone immediately, pause. If your conclusion makes you want to punish somebody, pause. If your conclusion makes you feel that you must expose someone publicly, pause. Truth does not need chaos to prove itself. Sometimes the strongest response is simply seeing clearly and changing your own position. Maybe you stop oversharing. Maybe you stop explaining yourself. Maybe you stop trying to earn someone's approval. Maybe you stop waiting for an apology before allowing yourself to heal. Maybe you create distance. Maybe you have an honest conversation. Maybe you discover there was never a serious problem at all. The right response depends on the actual facts. But there is one thing you can control: how you respond to what becomes clear. This is where the spiritual meaning becomes deeper. If you believe God guides you, then guidance does not always mean receiving a supernatural announcement. Sometimes guidance comes through wisdom, through circumstances, through repeated patterns, through conviction, through a conversation, through a closed door, through a new perspective, through realizing that you have been trying to hold together something that no longer fits the person you are becoming. That is why you should never reduce spiritual discernment to dramatic signs. Sometimes the most powerful sign is peace after you finally stop forcing something. Think about that. You may have spent months trying to understand another person's behavior, but what if the breakthrough is not getting them to explain themselves? What if it is reaching a point where their explanation no longer determines your peace? That is freedom. And perhaps this is the hidden treasure inside the title. The person you least suspect may have been hiding something, but the discovery may reveal something about you. It may reveal how deeply you care. It may reveal where you need boundaries. It may reveal how much approval you have been seeking. It may reveal how afraid you have been of losing people. It may reveal that you have been confusing loyalty with self-abandonment. And it may reveal something beautiful too. You may discover that you are stronger than you thought. You can hear something difficult without falling apart. You can accept disappointment without becoming bitter. You can walk away without needing revenge. You can forgive without reopening every door. You can love people without allowing them unlimited access to your life. That is maturity. And perhaps that is why this message reaches you at this point in your journey. Not to make you suspicious, to make you discerning. There is a difference. Suspicion says, everyone is hiding something. Discernment says, I will pay attention to what is actually true. Suspicion says, I need answers immediately. Discernment says, I can wait until the evidence is clear. Or suspicion says, I must protect myself by trusting nobody. Discernment says, I can have boundaries without closing my heart. That difference can change your entire future. Now consider another possibility. What if the person you least suspect has been hiding something good? Perhaps they have been carrying a burden they did not know how to discuss. Perhaps they have been planning an important conversation. Perhaps they were struggling privately. Perhaps they were afraid that telling you the truth would change your relationship. Again, we cannot know private facts about another person simply because a message feels powerful. That is why wisdom matters. Do not turn a spiritual message into a license to accuse. Let reality confirm what is real. Your faith should make you more honest, not less. And if something genuinely needs to be addressed, address it with dignity. Ask, listen, observe, then decide. You do not have to become cold. You simply have to become clear. There is another transformation happening here. You are learning to stop treating every unknown as a threat. An unknown is simply an unknown. You can allow time to reveal what you cannot yet see. That takes patience. And patience is difficult when you have already experienced disappointment. But perhaps you are stronger now. Perhaps you can wait without obsessing. Perhaps you can love without controlling. Perhaps you can trust God without demanding that every detail be revealed today. That is a different kind of confidence. If you have reached a point where you are choosing clarity over assumptions, you can share this in the comments. I choose clarity over fear. That simple sentence can represent a major change in how you approach people and situations, because your next chapter should not be built on suspicion. It should be built on truth. And now we are close to the real payoff. The revelation is not simply that someone may have kept something from you. The deeper revelation is that you do not need to remain trapped by what you did not know. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to reconsider. You are allowed to establish boundaries. You are allowed to forgive. You are allowed to move forward. And you are allowed to discover that something you once feared was actually preparing you to become wiser. That is where the hidden meaning becomes visible. The situation was never only about another person. It was also about the person you were becoming through it.